friends, welcome to CEC live lectures. I am Dr. Pavitra Bharadwaj. I teach at Jesus and Mary College, University of Delhi in the position of Associate Professor in the Department of Computer Science. So friends, in this series of lectures we are talking about website designing, and we have been covering different topics related to website designing, as in we've talked about images, we've talked about tables, and we have talked about frames. Now in today's lecture we are going to talk about a very important element of any website, that is the form, right. So basically what is a form? A form, as you all know, is a tool through which users data can be gathered, users data can be captured, right. So on websites, normally we see a lot of forms are there at different places, and there are different applications and different reasons for which forms may be there. So basic reason and the basic functionality is that it will accept information from the user or the client and it will provide it to the server. So basically it gives an interactivity to the website, because the user can put in some information and submit it to the server and get the response back from the server. So there are different types of forms that one sees across websites. So we can see a simple form like a search form. What you see on Google is a simple form, a search form, where there is one text box and then you have the search button. Then we have an order form, right. We can have a sign up form, we have survey forms, you see admission forms are there, you see various types of forms where you are asked to submit your feedback or you are asked to submit your details. On government portals there are so many different types of forms. So there can be n number of reasons why a form has been put on the website, but it's important to note that the basic purpose and the basic utility of the form is to send users information, to collect the data of the user and put it across to the server, right. So when we are creating a web page which has got a form, we need to of course use the HTML element, and this HTML element for creating the form will have various controls, because when you see forms online you see that there are multiple methods in which data can be collected. Like some places where, like for example, your name and email ID, the text boxes are given where you actually key in your data. Then you can also have drop downs where you simply select, or there can be choices, or there can be options like check boxes, and there will be buttons, etc. So there are multiple controls, and different forms have got different ways of accepting information from the user, right. Besides this, what you see, what the client sees on his end, there is a back end to the server also, or there is a back end processing of the form also, because when the data is collected or when the data is gathered from the client and the client clicks on the submit button, the data is then transferred to the server, right. So at the server side also the processing of this data will have to be done, okay. So the form data will be processed, and like if it's an email is to be written to a text file, or an update to the database is to be made, or some other type of processing on the server has to be done, so that and a message, corresponding message is shown to the user whether what is the status of the forms processing. So if we look at this diagram, it is very clear from this that we have a user, okay, and the user is accessing or filling some information on through his computer or through his node, and this information is sent to the web server. Now on the web server there can be, as we had already discussed this, there could be database servers, there could be application servers, so all these servers are interconnected, and whatever data the user has filled in, it goes to the server in the form of HTTP request, and the data may be submitted in a database, or it may be processed by the application server, and a response is generated and sent back to the client, right. So basically when a form is submitted, so this is a more interactive, because the server will always send a message back to the client about the status of the form, whether the form could be submitted, it could not be submitted, or whatever action is to be taken by the data of the form. So, if you see here, this is a simple form that we see which has got the different types of controls. So, as we just saw that in name you have a simple text box in which the user can enter the name. Then there is another type of text box called the password, in which the characters are hidden, as you all know. Then you can choose from the radio button, it gives you the option of choosing one of the given options. Like for gender, you can choose either male or female. Then there can be a drop down to choose between a set range of values, right. Then you can have check boxes where you can choose more than one option, okay. And then you can have a bigger text area where you can give in more lines of text, because in text box you give only single line of text, but if you want to give your remarks or suggestions or feedback or query, then for that you need a bigger text box, so that is known as a text area. And then of course you have the submit button, you have the cancel button, or you have the refresh button, which are actually more of event driven buttons. So when you click on these buttons, some action will take place. Either the data will be sent to the server, all the values will be reset, or the form will be cancelled, depending on what button you are using, right. So we are going to see how this kind of a form can be created and how these different controls can be used, and what is the purpose and what are the extra attributes which we can add to each of these controls to enhance their functionality, right. So the first and foremost tag that you need to create a form is of course the form tag, right. So you have an opening form tag which has got several attributes, and in the end you have to close the form tag, right. All other controls will come between the form and the closing form tag, right. Now the arguments, what attributes you can specify to the form tag, each has got its own particular functionality. The first argument that we use with the form of course is the action attribute. Now what do we mean by action? In the action attribute of the form, we will give the URL, or we will give the path of the file at the server where the data of this form will be processed, right. So action attribute means it is the path or it is the address of that file on the server where the data of this form is going to be processed. So you will give the complete path of that file, okay. So if you do not specify, if the action attribute is missing, then the URL of the document is assumed, right. So what it is saying, that it tells the form that the program is executed by the server when the form's data is submitted, okay. So action attribute is very important and it is mandatory, because it is the path of that ASP file or JSP file which will which is going to process the data. The next attribute of the form element is the method attribute. Now method, basically method means how the data is going to be sent to the file or to the server, right. So first is action, where we say where the data is to be sent. Method specifies how the data is to be sent. So in the method attribute we can have either get method or we can have a post method. Two values can be given, either get or post, right. So the difference is in the way, or in the way the information will be sent to the program, right. So generally we use the post method, okay. Post method is the default method, but we can also use the get method, right. Then we also have another attribute that we had discussed, that is the target attribute. Target attribute tells where to open the page sent as a result of the request. So when the server is going to send back the response, right, so where is that response going to open? So we had seen in the previous lecture also that in target, you can specify the location where it is going to be pointed, and we had seen that there are certain reserved targets also, like underscore blank, underscore top. So you can specify with the form also whether you want the response from the server to open in the same file, it to open in a new window. So all that you can specify using that, right. So we were talking about, the method attributes in the form tag. So in the method attribute you can specify the get, okay, which is the default. So form data is sent as a URL with several question marks and underscores, and the information is appended, right. So this is used only if the data is in ASCII and not more than 100 characters. So get method is only used for simpler data and for non-encrypted data, right. But when you are having the post method, then the data is sent in the body of the URL request, right. So this post method, when your data is being sent by the post method, it cannot be bookmarked by most of the browsers. So post method is more secure, although the default is get method, because get method is used for simpler and smaller forms, right. Then like all other controls like forms and tables, here also your form tag can also have an attribute, or rather it must have an attribute called the name attribute, right. So name attribute is very important in case of form, because when at the server side, when the processing is being done, right. So there can be multiple forms which are there in the website, right, and which forms is to be referred, and how do you refer that form by the JavaScript, that is specified by the name, right. So because forms, they are not visible object on the screen, it is a logical concept, and a form is actually only holding the different controls together. So you do not see a form as such on the screen, you only see the controls, right. So therefore it is very important that the form should have a name, and more so because multiple forms can be there. So you should have the name to the form, right. Then you also need to specify the encryption type that you want to use. Nowadays we are, everybody is very conscious about the way the data is being sent, the way the data is being encoded. So that also needs to be shown, that is what is going to be the encryption type of the form, that is how the data is going to be sent, right. So these were some of the attributes which you give with the form tag. So you will give the form name, you will give a target, you will give a action, you will give a method, you will give an encryption type, right. But as we know that form is only a logical concept, it is only a place where all the controls can be held together. So the real aspect when you talk about the form is the aspect of the controls. What are the different controls like text boxes, check boxes, radio, buttons, etc. So all these together they will form the controls which are used to collect data in the HTML form, right. So we are going to look at how each of these can be used. So you have text, you have checkbox, radio, select, file select, hidden controls, you have clickable buttons, you have the submit and the reset button. So first and foremost we try to characterize them, or we try to categorize them into groups. So first is the text input control. Text input control can be single line of text, it could be a hidden text, or it could be multiple lines of text, right. Like for example, you want the user to input the name, or it is a simple search box, right. In that case one line of user input is enough. So then you will use the single line text input control, right. So you will use the input control, input type is equal to text. Then if you want that the text should be single line but it should be masked like passwords, then you will use the input type is equal to password type of control. And if you want multiple lines of text input to be entered by the user, like you are asking for a feedback, you are asking for comments, then you will use the text area tag. So there is one tag called the input type tag, in that you can use text and password, but if you want to create a text area, then for that is a separate tag in itself, right. So how do you define a text box? Say for example, you want to give a simple text box. So you will write input type is equal to text, and you will also give a name to the control, because we already said that at the server side each control has to be identified. So your form needs to be identified with a name, and within the form each control has to have a unique name. So because this text box is asking the user for email, so we give it the name as email. So this is how you can create a form which is accepting the user's email. So you write input type is equal to text because you want a single line of text, and you give the name to this. Besides this also, the input type can have several other attributes that we will look at also. So the first for the input type is the type attribute, in which you specify whether you want a text box or you want a password or checkbox, etc. Then you have to give a name to the control which is sent to the server by so that it can be recognized. Then you give a value attribute to your input element. Now value attribute has got different purposes for different controls. In case of text box, whatever you give in the value attribute will be the default value, that is when the form will load, and whatever is written in the value attribute, that will be shown to the user. Then you have the size attribute. The size means the width of the text input control in terms of characters, how many characters wide it will be. Then you can also specify the max length. Max length means the maximum number of characters that a user can enter into the text box. Say for example, if you do not want that the name should be more than 30 characters, so you will write max length is equal to 30. In that case, after 30 characters, the user will not be allowed to enter any name. Okay. Then the next type of input control is the password. So password, as we already know, it is also single line text, but it will mask the characters, it will hide the character which the user is entering. The functionality and the rest of the working of the password input control is very much similar to that of the text box. Okay, so in this case we will write input type is equal to password. You will give a name, then you can always give a value which will be the initial value. You can give the size to the password, which will allow the width, again the same thing, and the max length, that is what is the maximum number of characters which the user is allowed to put in. So you can see here we are specifying password, input type is equal to password, and we are giving a name. So here we are creating a password box where the user can enter the password, and whatever text the user is entering, that is coming as a masked text. Then we can also have for multiple lines of text, right. So like for example, if your user has to give some comments, right. So in that case you want to specify more than one sentence, right. So you create that using the text area control. So text area is a separate control, it is not a input type control. In text area we define the size by giving the rows and the columns, right, and you give the name to the text area. Name is inevitable for all the controls, the name has to be specified. So you will give the name to the text area, and between the text area and the closing text area, whatever you will write, that will become the default value of your text area. So here we are writing enter your comments here, so that is becoming the default value of your text area in this case. So again, text area we already discussed that you will give the name, the size can be specified using the rows and the columns, and you will always give a name to your text area. Okay. So these are the three types of controls, that is input type is equal to text, input type is equal to password, and text area, which are used to allow the user to enter single line or multiple lines of text. The next is where you do not want the user to type, but to simply click on the control to give his or her choice or his or her option, right. So, in this case we have the first control which is called the checkbox control, right. So, where you want the user to select more than one option, right, like for example educational qualifications or hobby, or interests or skills. So, there of course the user can have more than one option to choose from. So, in that case we will give the checkbox control. So, how do we use the checkbox control? You will have to write input type is equal to checkbox, you will give the name to the checkbox and you will give a value. Now, here you are giving the value attribute, and the significance of the value attribute is that this value will be sent to the server, okay. And name of course is used for identifying the checkbox by the server, okay. So, whenever the user because you are giving separate names and separate values, so that particular value will be sent to the server if this checkbox has been selected. So, if you want to have 8 choices to the user, you will have to draw 8 checkboxes, and what you will give is you will give input type is equal to checkbox. So, then a checkbox will be shown to the user. Now, the checkbox can have other attributes also besides the name and value attribute. So, the first is the size of the checkbox, that is the size can be set, how big or small the box can be, it is to be specified in pixels, okay. Then you can also specify the style. This element we will talk about when we talk about the cascading style sheets, that is how you want the appearance of it to work. Then in the checkbox we can also have the tab index. Tab index means that the user can move from one checkbox to the other using the tab on the keyboard. The tab key on the keyboard can be used for navigating from one element to the other. So, you can set it to positive numbers or you can set it to negative numbers. So, then it will move forward or backward depending on how you have set it. Then you can also have the attribute called checked. So, checked means that when the form will load, by default this checkbox will appear as checked, right. So, whether it is checked or not will depend on this attribute. If you will not write checked before any checkbox, then it will not appear as checked or selected by the user. Then the checkbox can also have an attribute called the title attribute. Title attribute holds additional information which must be displayed in the tooltips of the element. When the user brings the mouse over, hovers the mouse over the checkbox, then some information can be displayed. So, that information you can give in the title. Then you have the type, where you specify the type of the element, and of course value we have already discussed, that is the value which will be sent to the server when the checkbox is selected. Likewise, if this is a checkbox that you use for when you want to allow user to choose multiple options, right. But if you want the user to choose only one option, which is out of the given option only one option is to be selected, just like gender or marital status or things like which will have a unitary value only. So, in that case you will use a different control, that is the radio button control. So, we will be discussing about the other controls including the radio button control in the following lectures. Till then, please keep watching CEC. Thank you.